When we study the scriptures, we find so much evidence that we are not being saved because of our good works or the righteous life that we're living in this world. Good morning. This is Pastor Ernie Lewis of the Blue Point Church in Sisseton, Illinois, with your thoughts for Tuesday. In Luke 16, Jesus had just spoken to the people about how you cannot serve God and mammon, or the things of this world. So many of that crowd were caught up in material things and their desire for them. You know, their crowd was not much different than the society in which we live today. People in our world today, it seems like, are caught up in having things, having more and more things. And we come to realize that the more we own, the more it owns us. So many today want things, but these things have come between man and God. After all, fleshly lusts may be ingrained in our sinful nature. We feel like we can't break free from it. The Pharisees in this crowd were the ones who didn't like Jesus' teaching. They tried to make fun of his teachings. The verse previous to this says, "Now the Pharisees, who were lovers of money, also heard all these things, and they derided him." They were refusing his teachings because of their own guilt. And he said to them, "You are those who justify yourselves before men, but God knows your hearts. For what is highly esteemed among men is actually an abomination in the sight of God." I wonder how they felt when Jesus rebuked them publicly, because this was often the scene at one of his teaching sessions. I can't believe they even kept coming. But the people, the picture of the men in this group is the fact that they were justifying themselves. That meant they rationalized all that they were involved with. They sought to try to vindicate themselves, even when they knew that their actions were wrong before God. So many today also try to justify themselves, and they pretend that they're really righteous in their deeds and their actions. So Jesus went on to say, "But God knows your hearts." Wow, does that ever occur to us? I mean, we can see our actions sometimes through rose-colored glasses and think they're okay, but God knows the truth in our hearts. Not only does he see everything we do that is unacceptable, that is sinful before him, he also knows our hearts, which means he knows our motivations behind the actions. When we sin willfully and we think we can get by with it, we are so wrong, because God already knows. Then he explains the real contrast to these people's thinking and God's truth from his word when he said, "For what is highly esteemed among men is an abomination in the sight of God." One of the great ventures of man is to try to amass wealth, or a wealthy fortune of some kind, at all costs. It may even seem like it's the thing to do in our society. You know, some will say, well, everyone else is doing it, but that doesn't really make it right. What is highly esteemed among men may be to seek after fortune or power or fame. But Jesus pointed out to these Pharisees and everyone else who was listening, as well as pointing it out to us today, what is highly esteemed among men is an abomination in the sight of God. Please notice that Jesus is not saying, God kind of frowns on that. He's not saying, well, I wouldn't get caught up in that worldly pleasure thing if I were you. What the world is making most important in their life is an abomination in the sight of God, which causes us to realize none of our actions are ever going to cause us to be saved. God sees our seeking to justify ourselves. Our sins, they're abhorrent and repulsive to him, an abomination. So we realize we can't be saved by our works. It has to be by his grace through faith, not of ourselves, not by any of our worldly labors, but it's a gift of God.